Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you all very much for coming. And my name is Eva Rapoport. I'm photographer and I also do something like anthropology of religion. So my main interest in photography is culture, cultural performances, parades, celebrations. So this is a bit different, but I find this topic quite fascinating. And although I worked, it's been almost a year since I worked on this project, you are the first people who see it at all, because like all the magazines I've been offering the story to, they were all saying, no, it's so dark, we don't want to tackle it. And I actually disagree. I think all this is not about how life could be bad for some people, it's about life that still prevails. Because my main impression from walking this Manila North Cemetary, it's like the oldest and the biggest in Manila, and I guess the most well known for these slums that coexist on the burial ground all together with what it's originally meant to be. And the impression is that life still goes on, and people, they have a community, they live their lives, there are children playing, and we don't know what their future could be, but their leisure time seems even more healthy than with like many kids in urban environment nowadays, just their devices and nothing else. These kids, they fly kites, they climb trees, they run around, they don't look unhappy, and adults as well, they have sports, they have games, gambling. So life is going on. It's not that dark, that grim. And another issue that I find interesting from my own perspective is from anthropological side, I'm mostly studying spirit possession and spirit beliefs, and all over the Southeast Asia and in Philippines also, most of the people, they believe in ghosts and spirits and whatever unseen it is there. And these are very rare Filipino people who don't believe in ghosts. They literally live among the dead, but they just don't have luxury of thinking about some horror you cannot describe with words, but like something lurking in the dark, whatever, they don't think of it, and they don't have these beliefs and ideas. And I think it's actually like a rare example of things work in the Marxist way, where the living conditions, they really define what people think and feel, and that's like another peculiar angle about these people and their life in this cemetery. So I guess, these are a few of my impressions that I wanted to share, and I'm also looking forward to hear our next speaker and to get more background on what's going on about this way, about life, and what's making it possible. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy that we were able to come, and I hope we have enough time that we can have some kind of discussion or question and answer or your own comparisons. It's going to change that. Okay, but the theme is very much the force to stay in the city. As you can see, normally speaking, governments, middle upper class people, even poor people, really look down on certainly informal settlers, the ones who live in not just regular slums, but illegally occupying land which is supposedly not proper for them to do. The cemetery dwellers are an even more specialized group in the sense that living with the dead, that's even in the normal situation of urban poor, that seems a little bit strange. It's kind of the end the last place that most want to go. But as you can see, once they get there, the spirit of community, people knowing one another, and the fact that you just have to survive somehow, is over, and people make the best they can out of the life the cards that are dealt them, might say. So in Metro Manila, about 1/3 of the 11 million population are developers. They are being mostly poor. They occupy government land and spaces which are not abandoned. Cemeteries, of course, are either abandoned or unwanted by the rest of the population. So those are often unoccupied land, unfenced lots, rivers, canal banks, coastal shores, and bridges along railroad tracks, public parks, and cemeteries. Just some quick, maybe I should sit there and do that. Just some quick pictures. Yeah, and see here. Again, this emphasizes that the urban poor move into whatever spots they can get into without hopefully being evicted immediately, but they're often right next to very high-end, wealthy enclaves. They're in spots, that are small places, usually in the city, but sometimes it's government land, often very large areas. Here along the rivers. Okay, so this is very makeshift, but in a way, as architects have said, very creative, how people make use of their environment with what limited facilities they have. And this is one of the ones where this is actually a tomb. I think that's probably North Cemetery also. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the only chart I have, because I thought we should have the Southeast Asia perspective. The share of urban slum populations in the total population. Well, first of all, the light lines are the share of the total population relative in urban areas, just in general. What proportion of people in Southeast Asian countries live are urban? But of that group, of the urban, let's say Lao, 79% live in slums. Philippines, something like, 44, about half of the urban population, or what I was saying, and 1/3, depends on all cities, 40, almost half. Right? So you can see, where are we in Thailand, 32%, I'm not sure when this was, probably about 25. Okay. In Thailand, 32% were urban as of that time, of which 26% of that urban population lives in slums. And I think the first slum I ever saw outside the Philippines was in fact Toy many, many years ago in Surichai. And that's where, in a sense, we began to see that this was really a phenomenon across the world, but certainly in Southeast Asia. There's often this impression these are migrant people, and so sort of why are they there? They shouldn't be there. They should stay in their provinces, or they should go home. They shouldn't be in those kinds of situations where they're illegal. They're illegally occupying the land. But what those of us who work in those areas keep pointing out is, after they've been there for 4 generations and they came late 50s, and you have about 4 generations have been born there. So the generations there today, the young people, even their parents, don't really know a province. They remember, of course, their grandmother came from Romblon or Cebu, and maybe they still speak some of that language, but basically they are Manila people, and they identify themselves as being in Manila, but being at the lowest end of the rung. So that dynamic, of course, is also important when it comes to organizing and criminal gangs and so on. So here are some more pictures. Now, why do they live there? Why do they fight eviction? And you saw that in the film, that they're so afraid they're going to be evicted. It's not so much that they love the facilities and flooding and filth that's there. They don't like that either. But the question is, what's the option? government has, in the last 30, 40 years, allocated land outside the city with land and relatively decent housing, and evicts them there. But what we found is that about 50% return to where they were, as the film said. But for many reasons. But one is that often it's basically employment. There is no source of income in these places outside the city. Their systems of earning are completely disrupted, and so many of them return to where they went, or try, if they can afford the transport fares, to go back and forth, leaving often the wife and children there and the husband in the city, and pretty soon he needs a place to stay during the week. He moves in with another woman, and then he'll have a separate family, and he'll have lots of family issues that emerge. So the resettlement outside the city has been mainly a failure, although thousands are now in such circumstances. Over the years, eventually, if they stay, they find ways of dealing with it, and the city is expanding so fast that in a way new jobs are coming out, as new malls are getting established, so security guards are needed, janitors are needed, and selling of all kinds. But in between, the tremendous, really suffering from terrible conditions. So they have to be near their livelihood, and the NGOs that I work with are very strong in saying on-site upgrading is the way to go, or if they're, let's say, right by the river or under a bridge, and find a space for them nearby. But if they're already living, well, not in a cemetery crowd, but if they're living something in a cemetery, they will, if you give them the option, they will move if there's a small space nearby that they can stay together, because connecting with one another is very important for them, emotionally, but also in an economic sense. They rely very much on reciprocal favor doing, what's called social capital today. So, because they are mostly in the informal economy, which means irregular employment, trying to do many different jobs at the same time or during a week, every family member is expected to earn, if at all possible, even the children, at low levels of remuneration. They, of course, they're not in the formal economy, which means they don't have benefits, regular salaries, and so on. They don't pay income tax because they don't earn enough, and which is, of course, what upper class people kind of charge them with, not even other people charge them with. You don't even pay taxes. But they argue, when they're organized, they learn that they can say, of course we pay taxes, we pay the VAT. Every time we buy anything, we're paying a tax. And second, we pay tax to the policeman, so he let me occupy this space to sell my goods. And you pay tax to the municipality to give you some kind of permit if you need it, and so on. So we do pay taxes. Here's just some more scenes, and fire is a very important way. Often the way that an owner of the lot, it's a private land, wants to get rid of them because he can't get them out, is to just burn it. And the favorite way is you get a cat, you tie rags to the tail, put in kerosene, let the cat go. And because these are so flimsy, the community goes up instantly, practically. But this is a coastal community, fishing. As we said, their incomes come from fishing. However, as I said, they will resist movement, and when the police come to evict them, they're usually met by people with sticks, stones. More recently, they have plastic bags with feces, urine, and to add to the stones and so on. So the police hate them, and there's really this violent confrontation to get them out. But on the positive side, why do they fight eviction? Because of the thriving social capital, because as they kept saying, the man kept saying, people are nice here, we get along sometimes, there are problems, but we get along, which means they help one another, because they really get no assistance from government. Government is always trying to get them out. Except recently now, government, I think, has begun to recognize that, you can't keep doing the same old thing for the last 50 years. So the mutual help in the neighborhood is very important. It gives them a certain predictability in their lives. They already have some form of earning, and they know, how to address that. And there are sort of basic services. At least more and more city governments have been allocating water to those communities, even electricity on a group basis, and so on. So there are various experiments, and in that sense, for those who have been there a long time, life has been, in their view, improving. And as you can see, they say, now we can afford a TV, now my wife has a sewing machine. They usually buy items that you can pick up and take with you, because if they're evicted, then that's all wrong. If they put investments in the house itself, and it's demolished, that's it. So they will only develop the house as much as necessary to live in it if they're afraid they're going to be evicted, because they may lose it. Whereas if they invest in a TV or other household implement, that makes more sense. They can move it. So the sense of belonging and community is really quite strong the longer they've been there. As I said, violence many of them living in the railroad tracks now. We're now, with the NGOs I work with, facing a problem of 200,000, we say, or more, families living along the railroad track from Manila all the way to Sorsogon, which is in Bicol, the southern Philippines. Because the new railroad is coming in. It's going to be funded in part by Japan, JICA, but in part mostly by the Chinese government, which the current administration is absolutely in love with, it seems. But for the people, when they hear the Duterte administration say, we're going to have to build, and really make this country great, they say, you know what that means to us? It means evict. All of us along the train tracks will be evicted. And although because of the NGO work and the people's organizations that NGOs have helped form, which are really quite strong, that object and negotiate and so on, the idea, the government is at the moment willing to enable them to find spaces in the same municipality so that they don't move far, and then there's supposed to be a commitment to develop on-site in the same municipality. But we are now absolutely making sure, fighting or negotiating with government to make sure that happens. It's one thing for the housing people to say that, but we don't know how. The president is very unpredictable, so we never know whether everything gets overturned overnight. I guess the basic, even further than that, is from previous experience with China-funded infrastructure. China is not interested or not supportive of basically now Philippine government commitments to participation of the people in trying to solve the problem. And that's a process that was happening for many years. And it's kind of established now, but the people are very afraid, the ones who are going to be affected here, that since the tracks will be laid, or next year, in 1 year, how they're going to mobilize, find a location, work with the local government, which often isn't very helpful. They don't really like the people there. They would rather use any land available for high-end kinds of investments. So that's the latest issue that these groups are facing. All right, so urban-born slum dwellers are city people. They speak the language of that city. Manila is Filipino or a version of Tagalog, not their own local languages, except in rare cases, in some cases. But so there's a sense that we are all together here. The whole notion of moving up, we did a study of what's the notion of moving up. We found that mainly the orientation, people are not. They want their children to move up. In fact, the strategy is a cross-generational one for survival, that they will struggle and so on, and send their kids to school. The Philippines is amazing in the number of people who go to school, because the hope is that eventually they will make it to college. That's the dream. As the one woman said, if only my children can make it to college. And the reason she's saying that is not just for status, although that's important,
But that's when you get into the formal sector. That's when you get a job that has benefits, that has regular payments, and that is employment. That's not just livelihood, which is kind of their life. So, but for this generation, the parental generation, who is moving up, and you can see they over time, they improve their actual situations. The dream, the hope is that they don't slide down. An illness is a major problem. An eviction is a major problem. Relocation, of course, is a major problem. And all of these re-emphasize the poverty side. So that's always the worry. Not so much, we're going to move out of poverty. We never hear that. My children are going to be the ones who will have a better life and not live the same life we had. That's what you hear. But the other side of that, the underside, is just pray that nobody gets sick, that we're not demolished, and so on. One thing I think it's important to know is that community residents, they say the urban poor, but they actually are quite a range from desperately poor, and these are often, the studies that we have shown that they're often women-headed households with 5 or 6 children where the husband has disappeared or was gone or died or something. Anyway, she's a woman-headed household with 5 or 6 young children, which means she cannot go out and earn much. And that's really the bottom, the poorest of the poor. But then there are other ranges where they'll say, we're poor, but managing, and then we're poor, but not bad. We're doing pretty well. So this is something we have emphasized very much in the government, and they now accept it more or less, the National Housing Authority, because they used to do averages, and they say the poor can afford to pay. What do you mean unaffordable housing? They can afford it. Look, the median income is this, and we say don't look at median income. Look at the categories, and the ones at the top probably can pay, but the ones at the bottom there is no way. So you have to have differential approaches to how to address it. Okay? And again, the emphasis that we keep trying to say, this city could not survive if you didn't have the poor. You don't want to glorify the poor or be glad that they continue to work. They're always struggling to move up. Right? But certainly the kinds of services that are rendered by, and not just informal sector, selling and so on, but security guards, janitors, manicurists, all the small-scale people who serve the middle and upper class are what makes the city a thriving one. So they do improve it. I mean, their own style, but you can see that if they can, they would like a better situation. Yeah, if you're faced with a flood, that's another disaster. And disaster reduction management programs are now very strong because of what's happened and the climate change situation. But again, for anthropologists, always say, what do people already do? They have been flooded for years, maybe not as strongly as the last one, but they have ways of handling it. Build on what they know. Don't just assume that you have to dump a whole new plan which has very often very low relevance to their lives. First, draw on what they have. Okay, so life goes on, as you have pointed out, because people are striving to have a better life. One of the things we found is that in organizing communities, women are really the most active. One, because they're there all the time. And they know the people in the community, they relate to them all the time, and they call it social capital, bonding social capital, they bond with people in the community. They're very motivated to make these changes and will suffer very much themselves, in order to enable their children, husband, family to survive. And in Southeast Asia, women handle the money. And so they're very skilled at managing with what little they have, and they can negotiate with the authorities much better than the average man can when it comes to how you manage money, and because they are the entrepreneurs. So they're very skilled at negotiating. Just as a quick example, when I asked some of the women, why is it that it seems women are the ones who are always the leaders here in many communities in Manila? And aside from all this, she said, I mean, here's an example. If I go to the market and they say, how much is that? 20 pesos. Of course I'm going to say, 20 pesos? Come on, this 10. Then we haggle and then we settle for 15. If my husband goes and the vendor says, that's 20, then they got this money, give her 20. They don't like to negotiate. It's more a contest. And when they deal with the authorities, even if the authorities are now kind of willing to listen to people's views, the males, because of the power relations with other males, can easily get angry, and that, of course, messes up everything. Whereas women are very committed to nonviolence and to placating, standing back, negotiating, and really manipulating the system. So so we find in organizing that they are really excellent leaders, and they know when to call in the men. It's not that they're trying to become so separate and be in charge of power, but they take that role and then they call in the men when there's a need to have some, other kind of involvement. So here they are. This is an example of they get together and they're planning how they're going to, collect the funds in order to make a down payment on the mortgage program system. So finally, what does it take so that those cemetery dwellers maybe could have a different kind of life, at least of their children? Recognizing their contributions to the city and society, the notion of citizenship, and the organized groups are very strong with that. Citizenship, we have a right to the city, because before they used to throw them out, you had no rights. Now they're very strong, and organizing makes a huge difference in that. Government has now even formally said that they will pay attention to people's plans, and community organizers help people develop plans, and they're different for every community, of course. So we are trying to communicate, those of us who are in the academic side, trying to communicate with government. You have to have a system in the bureaucracy that's responsive to variation. You have to have government officers who are willing to see variations and respond to them. Urban land reform, absolutely crucial. One of the things now we are getting into is finding out what is happening in the areas around Metro Manila. It's around the 18 cities outside, which are being bought by developers for golf courses and big malls and resorts and so on. And we're now asking, what happens to the people who were there? Do they pay them off? How much? What's the situation? We don't know. So we're actually organizing a meeting next week of key people who work in urban land to find out just what's the situation, what do we know, what don't we know, what happens to those people, and is there a research agenda we should develop, and is there an action advocacy agenda that goes with this, lobbying in Congress, lobbying the National Housing Authority, and lobbying for an urban land reform, which is very hard considering that this is, if the vision of Manila is a globalizing city, it has to be a green city, a competitive city, and competitive cities apparently have no place for poor people, certainly not people like the ones in the cemetery. But then how can you get a city if you don't recognize and bring in an inclusive way, acceptable way, the 1/3 or 1/4 who help it run but who are always demonized. So there are, we're saying that government, especially local governments, have to police much more the big developers who get away with a lot. They're not really controlled. But local government benefits from them because they get big taxes, and there's of course a lot of corruption, and they would much rather have a big mall than social housing, even though their responsibility is to do land banking for social housing. Okay, and we have to look at the whole structural and globalization issues that are really making cities the way they are now, globalizing cities, but what happens to the poor in the process. And so the end is, that's who you hope will have a future. Those kids someday in the future with their mother, very hopeful, inspiring, will find her kids in a city where they have a decent level or a decent life. So that's it.
I think we have the broader picture in which the people living in the cemetery is just a subset of the broader issue of poor living in urban slums. So I open the floor for question to Eva or to Mary. The first three, courageous one. That's Richard. I'm sure you have. Okay, 1, 2. No? Okay, please.
It was I was very much impressed at how you are able to be photographing. And that was, apart from you have brought completely another aspect of life, which for us, I was really impressed at how do you come with a good rapport, I mean a relationship with that. I was interested. And for Mary, I may come later because this is so much also happening around in Thailand, Bangkok, and other cities. So that maybe we will come into that next question.
Okay. Introduce yourself.
Fascinating presentation as this issue of urban always is, and wonderful photography. It really shows the spirit that's there. Just an observation. I've had the pleasure to walk with Mary through some of the informal communities in the Philippines, the government-sponsored ones as well as the ones that have sprung up wherever. One of the observations, when you look at the numbers and the space limitations, there's kind of a natural expectation that they will start building up in order to take advantage of reduced size. And in fact, where the government of the Philippines has facilitated that, those were the most depressing places we visited on our trips through these informal settlements, where the government has actually built a 3 or 4-story high-rise with water, with common areas, etc. They were desolate. The spirit that Eva shows in her other photos wasn't there. It was obviously lacking of depressing and dark and sluggish in the most negative sense of the word. I wouldn't say even community. And I'm speaking of Smoky Mountain in this case. So I'm just wondering what you think. What is it about formalization of these problems that kills that spirit? And is there some way around that? Another observation just from living in Islamabad, Islamabad being a planned city, I think it was built in the 1960s, it's a grid pattern and every block has in its center a slum built into the plan. They call them sweeper colonies. And they have nothing. It's just desolate what you see in some of these pictures, surrounded by beauty of the states and green tree-lined streets, etc. The opposite end of the spectrum, is that something that would solve the problem? And if so, how can we live with that? Because it seems a little bit absurd to formalize poverty in the midst of plenty. A little bit hard to come to terms with it. Would the spirit be broken? In the sense of Islamabad, I thought they were thriving when I was in. I thought it worked, even though it was not pretty to look at how it was formalized in the past.
Can I another question? I asked the question. What about the other side? I mean, these are poor people living in cemetery that are for the rich. So we heard about the poor. Can you say something about the rich, both from the photographic side as well as on information? Yeah.
So I'm not sure there is like anything very special about how this project came to be, because for at least, yeah, I think this one is just a bit more adequate. Yeah, so my idea of human interest photography is the best thing for photographer not to be noticed. So you just walk around and you try not to make people pay attention to you. And in this case, yeah, I had certain concern because technically it's a slum and I'm not a strong, tall guy. I'm just a small lady with a camera, and I didn't feel like not seeing my camera after walking there. And yeah, there was one like local lady, friend of a friend, who walked with me at least once, and I don't know, it was a bit comforting. I don't know if she was any good for protection, but nobody actually tried to attack us, and people just mostly didn't mind. And yeah, I was talking to some people online about what is the best way to get to the cemetery and take pictures there, and someone was claiming that it's okay to ask the security guards, and it's their duty to even make sure that you are safe, but sure, the first thing and the only thing those guards said is there's like no pictures. So officially nobody wanted this to happen, but the people themselves, they didn't mind, and just they live their lives, and the goal of photographer is just to be there and to witness it. Yeah, and to what Leah said about the cemeteries for the rich and disparity, because this cemetery has it all. You can see like big, impressive mausoleums, and you can see these multi-level tombs, and there are some stories about the people who actually have their relatives, parents or even children buried, and they live nearby their own dead, not just some dead that are there. But also Philippines, they have so this is Manila North Cemetery, and there is Chinese cemetery right next to it, and nobody, I guess, just is allowed to live there. And these are like old mausoleums, 2 stories, really big buildings, very impressive architecture, and yeah, these are the dead who are way better off than the people who live around. And it's said that there are even so there are architects who specialize in making projects for these mausoleums to be built, and they basically include facilities for the living, but not for the poor who have to stay there, but for the relatives who come maybe like once, twice a year to particular celebration, and they have a place to have a rest. They might have a sort of a kitchen to cook. There could even be air conditioning in these mausoleums. So yeah, this is like another angle, another story about this huge disparity between the dead who occupy these mausoleums and the living people who have to make everything by themselves and figure out the water, electricity, and everything, because cemetery is not meant to be populated.
Yeah, your observation that as people move into the more high density type environments, that whole spirit of community, they seem to be less happy. But what we found is that when in those communities that I know, that they had a people's plan, they found the land nearby, and they worked with an engineer, and the Social Housing Development Corporation, which evolved out of a community mortgage program system, which NGOs started and government took it over because it seemed to work. People organized, and they would be on private land usually, and they want to buy the land if they could, permanent, if they have security of tenure. And so NGOs work with them, community mortgage program, that they collect funds, they save, and then make a down payment. And first they got foreign donors to fund, construct some of the program, but now government is taking it over. And we have a social housing finance corporation run by a former NGO person who founded the community mortgage program, so it has worked out very well. And in those cases, what the system is, they've organized, they want to get secured tenure on site if possible, but if that's not possible, then they identified, in one case I'm thinking of, they identified a piece of land nearby where they could all fit, hired an engineer to help them work it out, and architects who volunteered for low-income NGOs, also architects initially, and they worked out, I think, a 3-story thing. But it was always in consultation. The architects were constantly in discussion with the community groups. So, and it's not just the leaders. They make sure that everybody knows what's happening. And so they worked out a semi-high density, 3-story, but it's actually vertical 3 stories. They wanted, each one separate so they know which is theirs, kind of thing. But anyway, what the point is that when they're involved in the design, and they learn from architects whom they trust and engineers that, if you want to do that, it's going to cost you much, much more. If you make it so that, let's say, all the piping will be just in one section, which means that the architect follows, it'll be much cheaper for you. So, because when people learn that, then they say, yeah, okay, let's do it this way. So they begin to adjust, and you can get those kinds of arrangements. So the issue is not so much they don't like those buildings. The reason they don't like those buildings is because they're all standard, designed by National Housing Authority, 4-story, which is not much more than a 3, and they're all the same size for the most part. And you can't sell anything up there. Where are they going to sell the goods? What are they going to do with the welding shop that they make an income from? What about their little manicuring shop? It's not allowed in there, and so on. So the architecture doesn't often fit. But what we find is when there's a discussion with the technical people whom they trust. They have to trust them, then you can get some really good results. I wish I had my other one. I'd show you some of the constructions, the buildings that are going up now. They're really usually 3-story, and which people are really very happy. But the architects help them design cooler, how cross ventilation will be there because they're not going to have air conditioning, and so on, so on. Yeah, so I think, and the Islamabad thing, you program slums. Well, you have a place for the poor because you need them to service the whole other people. But I think it's not enough to, then if those people organize, then they can really make demands that their own situation will be improved. And they should, and the government actually should not allow them to continue not to have access to basic services. They should make sure that they have jobs, or if the livelihoods that they've developed on their own, usually selling services that those are not illegal. I had a former UNICEF rep from in Africa, a Filipino, ran for barangay captain in the central city. And he was a very participatory process his whole life. And the first thing he did was he called all the kids who collect garbage. And police are always after them, so he said, all right, look, I'm going to give you, if you want to continue doing this, I'll give you push carts that actually work. They're not so heavy. I will talk to the households to separate the garbage, and we can make an ordinance that they have to separate the garbage, and we will give you first rights to go and collect, and you will have a badge so that you're all registered. So we made them all legal, And it was a win-win situation for everybody. So there are ways of doing it, if you really talk to those who have the problem and get some of the solutions from them, and then provide the technical and bureaucratic requirements that are usually beyond them, but are possible, which is where the NGO sector and government, of course, come in.
What's the future of cemeteries?
Wait, let's see if there are other questions. Any other question? Okay, yes?
We know that cemetery is an old tradition.
Yeah.
Cremation is around. Are habits going to be able to change?
If you want to, just on that, quite amazingly, I'm very surprised. There's a lot of cremation now. It's, the middle upper class are now going for cremation with very fancy mausoleum, little ones though. And so usually if that is accepted, then the local people will probably go along because that becomes a style and it will be much, much cheaper. So I would say that's really going to be the way of the future. And that happened largely because the Catholic Church changed its orientation. Before, cremation was absolutely not allowed. But in the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years or 30 years, now that's acceptable. So yes, I think it's changing. And while cemeteries will become small repositories of, little urns, I think.
Yes? Just a quick question. I'm wondering what it's like, have you experienced interacting with these people in the slum regions? Are they generally forthcoming or are they kind of cold and distant? Like, when I look at this photo, I wonder what it's like to say hello to these guys. I think, is it a risk, or if you say hello, you get a trip home to you go deeper, or is it that's just
It sounds a photographer,
I would say there is like any big difference between people elsewhere in the city and in this area, and so in general everyone is mostly friendly and they don't mind it. Occasionally there could be people who don't want to be photographed, and so you just end up not having the pictures of them or a good pictures of them. If they start covering their faces, there is actually one picture with a lady who's doing this. The white one, the furthest from you. So I just don't want to say there is any difference. So they are like any other people in any other area, and it's more like, I don't know, from city to city or even from country to country. Somewhere they, like in Indonesia, people really love being photographed, and actually you as a foreigner end up posing for selfies with them, not them like getting angry that you're trying to take pictures. And somewhere they just less relaxed, and some of them don't like it, and especially if there are like security guards, some people with just a little bit of authority. But so here I didn't face any actual hostility.
But I think what you said, that you're a woman, you don't look threatening at all, definitely helps. It always, and depends on where the community is at what. If they're going to be evicted, then they think, are you coming, not so much you, but they say, we're Filipino. Is he from City Hall? Is he collecting, what is he doing here? He's a stranger. We find that for me, if we know the NGOs or the parish workers there, usually you connect with them and then they bring you in and you're always absolutely safe.
I get surprised if nobody notices.
Even if you are a small woman, etc., I am sure you would be noticed with all the respect.
So they do, but the point is they shouldn't be looking at you once you're taking the picture. After that, it's okay. But yeah, if they notice you first and they start posing, it's not the same anymore. Because many people, they could be still like enthusiastic about being photographed, but they start doing something ridiculous, and it's not a candid shot, and that's not the point of what I'm trying to do.
Okay, last questions. All your curiosity are satisfied? Also from an architecture perspective?
I don't know, I was really curious about the rich persons.
Wait. Where is the microphone? I lost it.
Sorry, I was...
Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nabil. I'm an architect from Malaysia. There was two subjects that I'm really curious. One was I had no idea about this other museum for the rich and what spaces inside, and whether the fact they're from another community might be something. Was there any possible antagonism, like sometimes they have Indonesia, where there's like certain communities viewed as like richer than another community, and there might be some sort of racial problems, like in Indonesia. Is there such thing in the Philippines? And the second thing I'm curious about is the idea of not afraid of ghosts. But was there a situation where there was saying that there were relatives from the invited to come from elsewhere to stay there? Was there a situation where these relatives had beliefs in ghosts, but when they came to stay there, they decided to get rid of the belief in ghosts because they were looking at something? I'm just curious about that aspect.
So, do you mean relatives of the poor people or the rich people who visit their dead?
The poor people, the ones who live in the cemetery, because most Filipinos, they say they have strong beliefs in ghosts and spirits and possessions. I was just wondering whether these people, prior to moving there, the other relatives, they had beliefs in ghosts, but when they came, they decided to not believe in ghosts anymore.
Unfortunately, I don't know what is the prequel to this story, what was preceding it. So I just have an impression that these people, they don't think of ghosts, they just have other issues to take care of. But unfortunately I can't answer this question. And so about the mausoleums for the rich. So it is another cemetery, and people are not allowed to settle there, and I think it's just the issue of how it's being guarded. And in terms of architecture, it's very peculiar because most of the structures are really unique. You can see something like a pyramid, definitely something like Chinese temple or something, and still there are examples of something modern, elements of constructivism, and they're really all different. And I think it's a lot of fun for a person who understands more about the buildings and the aesthetics.
On the spirit, you're right. There's generally belief there when somebody dies, they're kind of near, they're around. The butterfly comes in. Oh, here it is. The spirit is there, but then there are all these rituals. In the Catholic context, 40, but it built on traditional rituals even before Spain. After 40 days, you have a mass, and the family gets together. And then they're near far. I mean, they're not so immediately present. They're moving away. And by 1 year, which is when you have another, feast, food, gathering, everybody comes and says prayers, that's when they're supposed to go away already. They're off there. And you've done the right thing by them. You've recognized, that the laws are there. You miss them and so on. So I think there's a system. In the case of the cemetery people, I suspect, it's a trade-off. if they have any other choice, maybe they might go somewhere, but if apparently they don't really have a choice, and because they know the people already, there's a certain security. Plus, you saw the statues, religious statues, the rosaries. I mean, people say prayers. You say prayers so that the spirits won't affect you negatively. So there are usually ways of handling them. It's not that you believe or you don't believe. That's not the issue. It's how do you deal with the ones who, most of them are positive or will not bother you unless you do something evil. Then, in the traditional, and they still are there are sorcerers who could deal with that for you. I think there's one more.
And the Chinese a conflict in the Filipino society with, like in Indonesia at the moment, there is Chinese Filipino.
Yeah, I mean, surely 34% of Filipinos have Chinese blood, if you want to put it that way. But identifying themselves, I think now a certain animosity is probably with the very wealthy, because the Taipan, so-called, are almost completely Chinese families, and they don't operate. They are really quite exclusive in a sense. Although many of the younger generations who are perfectly Filipino Chinese, and many of them my students, really are in a quandary because they're still pressured to be Chinese, especially in marrying, and many of them don't want to marry another Chinese woman or male if they don't like them, and so there are a lot of conflicts now. But I think the younger generation of Filipino Chinese is more Filipino, recognizing the Chinese heritage. But it's really the Taipans, and of course the fact that the President Duterte now all of a sudden has his love affair with China, that's making many people even more worried, I would say. Because there's an inherent still animosity, which is mainly controlled. And again, because younger generations are coming in, but it's so heavy that I think you're going to have lots of problems with that one.
I wanted to comment on the young man's...
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Stephen Hanchy. I live here in Bangkok. But I lived for a long time in Cairo, Egypt. And the city of the dead there has tens of thousands of tombs, which are now inhabited for the most part by second and third generation families who've been living there since the 1920s. Very few tombs have remained uninhabited. And I also was very curious about the superstitions involved in living in a place where people's bodies are buried. And I asked, quite frankly, what do you feel about living, among the spirits? And they are most often not their ancestors, so they don't know them at all, and they have no connection with them at all. But because it's largely an Islamic cemetery, not entirely, but 90% Islamic, there are, I don't know if you want to call them sorcerers, but people who come and recite the Quran and chase away the spirits, the mischievous spirits, of those who have been buried there. And so they have they reconcile their superstitions with their religion, because clearly Islam doesn't necessarily support the belief in evil spirits that live in the corners of rooms or that come back and visit their tombs. But people have a very firm superstition about it, which they, as I say, reconcile with their Islamic faith, and because these are fine places to live, they have no interest in moving, and the authorities have never really dealt with the issue of the population of these cemeteries, which are historical landmarks. And they have not actually become slums because the people keep them clean, the waste is disposed of. And it's a very interesting example, though, of what you were asking.
Can I just say that the ones that you saw, including North Cemetery, those are municipal cemeteries. So meaning it's government. That's why people feel they can move in, and maybe the government's leave them alone. The Chinese cemetery, I think, must be privately run, which it means they can close the gates and so on. And all of the big, memorial parks, that's right, which is really the upper class version. Chinese cemetery is very strange. I mean, it's different. But now memorial parks are for the rich and some very fancy ones. And those are all guarded. I mean, nobody lives in cemeteries that are privately guarded. It's the municipal cemeteries, government cemeteries that have like in all government land, where poor people feel they have a right. They're not they have a right to be there. There's this notion that this is open land, it's people's land. Why should we not be able to live there? And they know government will usually tolerate. And of course, they probably are paying some kind of under the cover rent or of some kind in order to remain.
Some of the young people I was reading is actually they're paying rent also sometimes for some of these tombs. But I am not an expert. I just became an expert in preparation for for this event. So I think we learned a lot about poverty, which is still an issue, although in the development world nobody talks anymore about poverty. Inequity, yes, but poverty is somehow out of fashion. And I think it's time to bring it back, actually, because there are still a lot of issues related to urban as well as rural poverty, the issue of religion, spirituality, and I was surprised to learn also about the death ritual. We are the same in Indonesia, so 40 days, 100 days, 1,000 days, while Thailand has the 100 days. So this is, of course, all pre the various different religions of Southeast Asia. I conclude with this, but we have time to eat pancit outside, so we have tried to have some Filipino flavors in honor of Mary and of course of the topic. And I am very grateful again to Eva, who is the second time actually that is exposing with us. Another time was very different style of photography, because it was very much, you can look there, it's more trance of kuda lumping, Japanese dance where people go into trance, and was very much on the face and the movement, and this is more on the setting. So you can see that she has various different way of expressing art. So thank you again, and the exhibition will be here for 1 week, this small exhibition, so please tell to your friend.